Executive function hacks, how to prioritize when you're overwhelmed with information. Trying to juggle too many things, trying to process too much information that's constantly coming at us is a surefire way to lead to overwhelm, meltdown, shutdown, and eventually burnout if we don't do anything about it. So in this video, I'll share some of my own tips and experience, how to prioritize information and identify what's important on your to-do list so that everyday life becomes just a bit more manageable. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. Tip number 1, if there's an unread email in your inbox that's more than 3 days old, delete it. That sounds pretty extreme. That is actually some advice that I've been given though, and that I've heard when you are in a role like a CEO role or another role where you're trying to manage a lot of information. Sometimes it requires being brutal when it comes to ignoring some things. So this was literally the advice I received. If an email is more than 3 days old and you haven't already read it, it can't be that important and you're better off deleting it. In other words, you're better off staying on top of your inbox so that it's not overwhelming than to be constantly playing catch up with mountains of old emails. Now that might be good advice for a CEO with an executive assistant managing a multi-million-dollar company, but for the rest of us, if you're anything like me, that just feels really unsafe, risky to just delete something without even looking at what it is. So while I don't adopt that particular advice for myself, I find it to be a really good reminder of what I'm trying to do when it comes to prioritizing information. The executive function task of prioritizing information necessarily involves choosing which information I'm going to ignore. And when we don't do this, we end up overwhelmed by all the background information. When I'm at a noisy restaurant and my brain is hearing everything that's around me and it's not filtering out the background noise, that soon becomes overwhelming. So in a similar way, in life in general, we are bombarded by a huge amount of information, which necessarily means I need to find a way to ignore most of it so that I can focus on the parts that are the most important. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this really, really difficult. Up until a little while ago, if I got a phone call from an unknown number, I would still pick up. I've stopped doing that now just because of the ridiculously high number of spam calls and the fact that no one who's not already in my address book calls me ever. But for a long time, my phone would ring, I'd look down at the unknown number, I would think, oh, this is probably a spam call, but it might not be. It might be important. So on that very slim chance that it might be important, I'll just pick up just in case it's an emergency and someone, I've been listed as the emergency contact and it's the hospital or it's a doctor's surgery or it's a call back from a company that I've been expecting. And instead of waiting on hold, I said, yes, please call me back because I don't want to spend 5 hours waiting on hold. What if it's important? Then I've just ignored it and I've missed that opportunity, and the feeling that I might be missing an opportunity if I don't process this information, if I don't take this call, leads me to say, oh, well, it's not that much extra effort. I'll just pick up. Now, that is exactly the kind of strategy that I've ended up using a lot in my life that has led to a significant amount of overwhelm due to information. And eventually I get overloaded and that leads to burnout. On the flip side, I've witnessed other people in my life have a completely different strategy. I remember talking to my housemate in a share house I was living in a little while back. And she was living right next to the front door. And she said, sometimes someone knocks at the door and I just don't even bother answering it. What? Someone knocks at the door. It could be a parcel for your housemate. It could be anything. And she's like, nah, it can't be that important. I'll just ignore it. And I remember being so shocked when I heard that. How could someone live their life ignoring potential opportunities like that? In reality, however, Most of the time, in fact, almost all of the time, she was right. Probably the biggest risk of not answering the door is that maybe a package wouldn't be delivered and we'd have to pick it up from the post office later. So she saved all of that energy, all of that time, all of that attention, all of that decision making of do I do something by simply deciding in advance, nope, this is just not worth my time to pay attention to this. And making a decision like that in advance saves us a huge amount of executive function resources. And it's actually not that extreme when you think about it. I do this every day when driving a car. If there's a red light, I stop. I don't ask myself the question, should I stop this time? Are there any cars coming the other way? What should I do? No, there's no decision-making process at all. Red light, stop, end of story. So similarly, now I've implemented the practice. If I don't recognize the number, hang up straight away. And that's just a tiny little executive function hack. It probably doesn't save me very much energy, but it's helping me to practice prioritizing instead of feeling the compulsion to act and respond to every piece of information I receive. Another really good example in the communication department is responding to emails, responding to text messages. This probably sounds ridiculous, but maybe there are some of you out there who can relate to this. There are emails, unread, starred, unopened emails in my inbox, in my personal inbox, from people from years ago. I'm talking like 5+ years ago, and I haven't deleted them, and I haven't unstarred them, and I haven't marked them read because I had the intention to reply to them. I had the intention that, yes, I would like to formulate a response to this really interesting question that you've asked me, or I would like to keep this relationship alive, but clearly it's been 5 years and clearly I haven't done that. So probably the best thing to do would be to let it go rather than have this entire backlog of unread, unopened, starred emails in my inbox that realistically, if I were to go back through them, I would probably, 90% of them, I'd probably decide, no, it's probably not a good idea to respond to this email. And then even if I did try to respond to the other ones, it would be too late. I've missed the opportunity. You send me an email and I send you a response 10 years later, that's not quite the same thing. So that's kind of the philosophy around this executive advice of deleting an email if it's more than 3 days old. Because the chances of it being not relevant, the chances of that person having already followed up with you again in a different way because you didn't respond are pretty high. So what we can do is deal with that entire mountain of emails in 1 second with one click. And this leads me to probably the worst habit that I have and that maybe you can relate to as well, which is not only do I not respond straight away, but I also save it for later and say, yes, I will respond to this, but not now. And then yet another unimportant task gets added to the bottom of an endlessly growing to-do list. Imagine I kept a record of all the missed calls from unknown numbers, and I thought about them all week and I put them all into my calendar and I made an effort to call every single one of them back a week later, just in case it was an urgent call. What a massive waste of energy compared to just recognizing that statistically it's probably not important. I can easily do this with physical objects as well. I've got boxes and boxes of stuff that I plan to sort later, because I know it's got some really good stuff in it and it's also really messy and got a lot of stuff that should probably be thrown out or that probably should have been thrown out 10 years ago. But I can't throw out the whole box because there's probably 1 or 2 things in that box I want to keep, but I also haven't sorted it in 10 years, which means I'm carrying around a whole bunch of stuff that I really don't need to be constantly worrying about. And this is the physical analogy of essentially the same thing. It's a lack of prioritizing. It's keeping everything because I'm not sure which parts are important that I should keep and which parts are not important that I should throw away. A metaphor that I like that helps me to get my head around what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to separate the baby from the bathwater. Once we do that, we can throw away the bathwater, knowing that everything important, everything of value has been saved. In everyday life, failing to do this leads to the type of doom piles that we were talking about the other day in the Autism and ADHD video. A doom pile is an unorganized, unmanaged, unprioritized collection of things that are probably mostly useless but might contain a few really important things. In my very first YouTube video, I compared my brain to a filing cabinet. And the analogy was that it takes a bit of effort to file things away properly, but once I have processed the information and it's in there properly, then I can remember it basically forever. I have really good access to information that has been filed away properly. However, if I get overloaded with information, if I don't have time to process it and file it away properly, then the analogy for that is like a sticky note on the outside of the filing cabinet. If it doesn't get actioned immediately, it's probably going to fall off and it's probably going to get lost. So this is one of the reasons why in some areas of my life, I'm really organized and really on top of things. And in others, I just can't seem to grasp the right information at the right time. Because if I am not adequately processing all the information, I put it in the to-do later pile, and then it just never gets done. A good example of this is details of social events. What I end up doing is I put it in my calendar and then I completely forget about it until I get a reminder later. Thankfully, I have a calendar now and I do it straight away, because before I was doing that, I would end up asking the same question: where are we going again this weekend? Who are we seeing again this weekend? What time are we getting there? Where is it again? Sorry, I probably asked you this 100 times already, but I'm going to ask again because it hasn't quite sunk in properly. So the big question behind this entire concept is, how do I identify which information is important and I should remember and I should recognize, and what can I just ignore? And it turns out this exact question is a key part of my life coaching work, helping clients identify what's the real important thing in this situation. It feels like there are 100 different issues all coming at me from different sides. However, if we filter that down, there's probably one or two, usually one, that stands out as the most important. And the best part about finding out which is the most important is that we can then forget about most of the others while we focus on what's important. This also works in terms of emotional regulation. If I'm experiencing an emotion, especially something like stress or anxiety, I can't throw away the emotion. I can't just suppress the entire emotion, because there is a really important message that the emotion is trying to tell me. However, once I identify what that important message is, what the reason for that emotion is, I can acknowledge that, act on that, only the important part, and then I can let the rest of it go. Managing anxiety is a really good example. If I identify the real risks and make an action plan to mitigate them, then I can safely let go of all the other things that are extremely unlikely to happen. So when doing this, you'll notice that I'm outlining a top-down approach. I'm suggesting to find what's most important first, rather than trying to prioritize the whole bunch. So that's a little bit like getting that massive doom pile and just having a quick scan through it. Is there anything that's really important here that I really need to focus on? Every once in a while, I forget my own advice and I try a bottom-up approach. And in the case of a doom pile, a bottom-up approach would be picking up one item at a time, going, what is this? How important is this? Do I need to keep this or do I need to throw it away? Where should I sort this? Okay, I'll put this in the not sure pile for now. Great. And then I get to the next one and I'm actually giving every single item in that whole pile a huge amount of my time and energy and attention. A good example of this is sorting photos. I went away for 4 months last year. I took 4 months off to try and recover from burnout. It was fantastic. I took lots of photos. Some of them are really good and some of them probably don't ever need to see the light of day again. But if I go through the entire list, looking at every photo one at a time, thinking, do I keep this one? Do I throw it away? Is it as good as this other one? Which folder should I put it in? Then that is such a huge drain on my energy that I never end up finishing that task. So instead, a top-down approach would be, let's have a really, really high-level scan through this entire folder of, I don't know, 20 or 30 photos, and I'm just going to pick the best one of this monument, or the best one of this city, or the best one with this friend. And then after I've picked a small handful of the best photos, suddenly it's not that important to sort the other 300 or so from best to worst because they're probably not going to be shown anyway. I use a similar strategy to prioritize my work. What's the most important thing that I need to do this week? What's the most important thing I need to do today? If I was sick today, if I woke up with the flu and I could barely get out of bed, what's the absolute minimum I would need to find a way to do regardless? And so you can see that by starting with the one most important one, once that's done, even if I don't get to everything else on the list, at least I know that I've done the most important one. And then hopefully it makes the second part of the process a little bit easier, which is identifying a huge mountain of tasks or things or information that I can just group all together in the one action and hit delete. Sorry, mountain of unimportant tasks and information, you did not make the cut, you are now gone. And the best thing I can do after that to save my executive function resources is to not have a second thought about it. So anyway, I think I'd better leave it there for today. Managing executive function is a big challenge for a lot of us, so I hope you found this video valuable. We actually did an entire webinar just recently on executive function strategies, so if you're after more long-form content, you might like to check out the library of past webinars on the Autism from the Inside website. We have a few different membership options with regular events and a new topic every month. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment if you can, letting me know what you think of this video and if you've got any executive function hacks of your own. So I'll leave it there for now and see you next week. Bye.